Good morning, everybody. Everything new under the sun. So we're looking at jpost.com, looking at the Israeli elections, and this is kind of the first update. So the votes have come in, most of them, anyways. They're still counting, and Likud again comes out in the lead for a single party. You can see on the left hand side there. That's Likud in terms of their number of votes. And then, of course, all the different parties have to come together to create a coalition to actually come up with a block or an overall majority winner. And that's what you see on the right hand side. Netanyahu block is the second last one. And then the last one is the anti Netanyahu block, or basically everybody against them. So again, Netanyahu is on top, it appears. And this is the way it's went in the last couple of elections. Likud, as a party, has won overall in terms of the all the rest of the party numbers, but then they got across that 60 mark to get majority, and right now they have 59. So that's the short answer. Now, as I've been talking about previously, this all relates to, I think, the 70 shepherds of Israel, and the 70 shepherds of Israel basically comes out of the book of Enoch. And it predicts that there's going to be 70 shepherds or leaders of Israel up until the Messiah returns. And so if there's 70, that means you should be able to count the various shepherds, right? And determine exactly when the Messiah is going to come back, right? Because after the 70th, then the Messiah. Well, this what you're looking at is from out of or referring to the book of Enoch. In a vision, Enoch saw that there would be 70 shepherds of Israel. And he called 70 shepherds and cast those sheep to them that they might pasture them. And he spoke to the shepherds and their companions, let each individual of you pasture the sheep henceforward, and everything that I shall command you, that do ye, and I will deliver them over unto you duly numbered, and tell you which of them are to be destroyed, and them destroy ye. And he gave over unto them those sheep. 1 Enoch chapter 89. These 70 symbolic shepherds watch over the flock of sheep that figuratively are God's chosen people, Israel. The next passage tells us that Enoch saw the first group of 35 shepherds as unique from the other shepherds to come. So the 35 shepherds have come and gone. And basically, these first 35 shepherds correspond to the 35 kings of Israel and Judah that ruled before the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the kingdom of Judah in 597 BC. After this, a series of foreign kings ruled over the promised land as shepherds. So it goes on, and so that 35 is done. Enoch sees 23 foreign kings ruling over Israel until the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Can you see that? Let me see. Keynote. There, pull that down low. So Enoch sees 23 foreign kings at the top there, ruling over Israel until the destruction of Jerusalem 70 AD. Adding their number to the 35 kings who came before, a total of 58 kings were foreseen as rulers over ancient Israel. And I saw until that 23 had undertaken the pasturing and completed in their several periods 58 times. So you see the terminology of several periods, and we're going to come back on that because basically there are some leaders that lead again and again. That is the case with Netanyahu. He has been leader 4 times at this point. After this, Enoch saw that 12 more shepherds would arise to govern Israel. So this is the last and final 12 that is talking about. He therefore foretold the rebirth of Israel as a nation in modern times, because this final 12 were past the ancient Israel time period. Sadly, Enoch tells us that this group of 12 final shepherds in Israel will do more damage to Israel spiritually, because it's a secular nation now, than the 58 bad shepherds who governed the country long before them. So there is no connection of Israel to God at this point. It's a secular nation, and I think that's where it's coming in, is more more trouble, more damage to the nation of Israel spiritually than before. So we come up with the last 12 shepherds. So the last 12 shepherds of Israel will therefore be judged and found guilty. It goes and so this is a prediction out of the book of Enoch, right? Extra biblical, but it's apparently a book that Enoch, Old Testament, pre-flood, wrote. And it says, one easy way to test the legitimacy of Enoch's prophetic vision, again, a prediction that Netanyahu is basically the last and final shepherd before the Messiah. One easy way to test the legitimacy of Enoch's prophetic vision of the 70 shepherds of Israel is to see how closely the prophecy of the 12 last shepherds applies today. We can do this by counting how many times prime ministers have ruled in the modern nation of Israel, the secular nation, since its inception in 1948. Uncannily, 12 men have served in office so far. That means there can't be a 13th. That means nobody else other than Netanyahu can come into power before the Messiah. Otherwise, it would debunk the prophecy of the 70 shepherds. If Benny Gantz, for example, or Bennett, if they were to become leaders, they would be the 13th leader of Israel in modern times, the 13th unique man in the prime minister position, and that would debunk the 70 shepherds of Israel. So Netanyahu is the last and final. So he has been holding on election after election. This is 4 times now that he has effectively won elections and held on to control. Remember the last election, he came up with an agreement with Benny Gantz, and Benny Gantz fought, but eventually agreed that, well, Netanyahu would serve the first year and a half, and then Gantz would serve the last year and a half, or whatever the term is. I forget if it's 3 or 4 years. But anyways, Gantz would serve the last half. Come to find out that Netanyahu actually then called the elections early so that Benny Gantz never actually got to serve as part of the agreement as a leader of Israel. Interesting. Again, because if Gantz got in there and became prime minister and ruled over Israel, then that would debunk the prophecy of the 70 shepherds of Israel, because Gantz would then be the 14th. So here's the 12. What did I say? 14th. He would be the 13th. But the Messiah, according to this prediction, is the 13th leader of Israel, prime minister. So Benjamin Netanyahu continues to hold on to it, and he's playing games, if you will, to stay in power, and has successfully stayed in power, and called the elections before Gantz got into power, because if Gantz got into power, it would be one too many, and that would debunk the prophecy. Now, I'm sure Netanyahu has no idea about the prophecy, but interesting that this is the way it's turning out. All right, so that being said, let's look at this. J-Post. Netanyahu with narrow loss as Israel counts election votes. So they're looking at the total 59. Right-wing bloc led by Likud and joined by UTJ, Shah's Religious Zionist Party, and Naftali Bennett's Yamina receives 59. So they need 60 to get majority. So again, a nail-biter. Again, this looks like something that's not going to happen. This is how God does things, I think, interestingly. And I don't know if this is inspired of God, but it does seem to be that God does these things in miraculous ways and fulfills these things in ways we never would have dreamed of, so that we can't debunk them and say, well, that was just chance that occurred. No, God does things in miraculous ways, so we can say, wow, there was no possible way that could have occurred, but it did occur, and so it must be miraculous. I lost all my highlighting here. Netanyahu would not be able to form a government for the 7th time in his 3-decade career. So he's continually been in the lead and in leadership. According to preliminary results from 97% of regular polling stations, Netanyahu's bloc won 59 seats, 2 short of majority. It goes on. Exit polls were inconclusive. Throughout the dramatic post-election night, the 3 channels, 11, 12, 13, initially called a victory for Netanyahu's Likud, assuming Bennett, who immediately said he would do what is right for the country, joins the coalition. So I guess they're kind of waiting on him. So then we see this image that I showed before. Netanyahu declared that his Likud had won in a speech delivered at the Jerusalem International Convention Center at 2:30 a.m. He vowed to avoid a fifth election and called on politicians across the spectrum to enter a government he intended to build immediately. Now, the prophecy of the 70 shepherds of Israel, Netanyahu has been prime minister, and this guy keeps getting elected. Second time, third time, fourth time. That's unprecedented in and of itself. But again, according to the prophecy, Netanyahu is going to be, there can't be a 13th prime minister there, otherwise it would debunk this prophecy. So in somewhat miraculous terms, let me go back to this here. In somewhat miraculous terms, Netanyahu is holding on against all odds. And I said that last time, and he's doing it again. And it's just, it looks to me like a, near miracle. He said that he has more than a double-digit margin, largest margin between the first and second parties in decades. Israel is the world champion of vaccines, Netanyahu said. We brought millions of vaccines for everybody, just like we made peace deals for everybody. So he's selling the peace deal thing to get control. Hours earlier, Netanyahu declared that he had won a giant victory. Netanyahu called on Yamina Lieber Naftali Bennett, who told him he was waiting for the final results and he would act. So Netanyahu is hoping Bennett will act for the good of all citizens of Israel. Netanyahu also called on other leaders in his political camp and asked them to join a strong right-wing government. So he's hoping Bennett comes on board and gives him the majority that he needs. So it's going to come down to the president, and the president's probably going to call it for Likud again, because Likud apparently has the most votes of any bloc, although not a majority. And the president is going to call on the prime minister, or the person with the most votes in this case, Netanyahu, and his party, his coalition, to come together and see if they can form a government. That means Netanyahu will have a certain amount of time basically to put together a coalition. So there's a live results. Again, Likud in the front on the left-hand side. Yesh Atid, Yamina, New Hope. And so he comes up, he's got to gather all these members and try and come up with a government. So is this going to drag on for a long time? Probably. The previous ones have dragged on and dragged on and dragged on. But this is incredible. This is happening in sort of miraculous fashion. Again, something that you'd never think would happen. God kind of lets these things kind of be drawn out in such strange fashion that you could never think it's possible. But in the past, it's ended up, again, confirming the 70 shepherds of Israel. Now, I'm not saying that this is a true prediction, because it's yet to be debunked. If there's a 13th prime minister, it will be totally debunked. But so far, it's been true. And what the prediction states is that Netanyahu will stay in power. He will stay in power until the Messiah comes. Now, is that Messiah Jesus Christ or the Antichrist? That's the big question, right? Who will that be? But this apparently, this prediction is still in play and has yet to be debunked. So we're going to keep watching it over the next days and maybe even weeks if this gets drawn out. So stay tuned, guys. Bible prophecy, I think, is being fulfilled, and extra biblical prophecy. And there seems to be a lot of it that is very relevant, as is the 112th Pope prophecy, which is still in play, by the way. Something I should revisit, that the current Pope is the last and final one before the Messiah. So we have these two indications that these are the last and final before the return of the Lord. And that agrees with, again, the timetable of the return of the Lord that says all items are coming into alignment to suggest that we are very much in those last days. We are very close to the 7-year period and the end of days. So be prepared, guys. Keep watching this. It's fascinating. And that prophecy of the 70 shepherds has not been debunked yet. Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to buy me a coffee, you can go to micahgallant.com/tipacoffee. And that is much appreciated. Thanks, guys. We'll see you guys in the next video.